Welcome everyone to this explainer. Today we're diving into a massive, honestly game-changing paradigm shift in the classroom. We're talking about transitioning from being just passive consumers of textbooks into empowered creators of your own custom teaching materials. Now, have you ever felt like the standard materials you're handed just, completely miss the mark when it comes to your actual students' reality? Well, you are definitely not alone there. So today we're going to unpack the actual frameworks you need to start designing your own highly effective learning tools from scratch. Let's start by challenging a pretty common misconception. Ask yourself this seemingly simple question. What do you actually picture in your head when you hear the phrase teaching material? If you're like most people, you probably instantly imagined a thick, heavy, commercially published textbook, right? But as we're going to see today, limiting our imagination to just the textbook is really holding us, and more importantly, our students back. So here's our roadmap for the day. We'll cover 1. What is teaching material? 2. The roles of the textbook. 3. Needs analysis. 4. Defining objectives and approaches. And finally, 5. Sequencing and motivation. Let's just jump right in. Section 1. What is teaching material? Broadening our definition of learning tools. Let's fundamentally expand our understanding here. What's really fascinating here is how simple, yet totally radical this definition is. Researchers like Brian Tomlinson and M. Arsalis provide this incredibly liberating concept. They state that teaching material is literally anything employed by teachers and learners to facilitate the learning of a language. This completely busts the myth that materials are only those standard published books. It means a YouTube video, a menu from a local restaurant, a pop song, or even just a custom worksheet you scribbled together last night. All of those count as valid, powerful teaching materials, as long as they facilitate learning. Section 2. Roles of the textbook. The traditional textbook in the classroom. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about that incredibly expensive, imported book sitting right on your desk? We absolutely aren't just tossing it out the window, but we do need to understand its specific function. Author Alan Cunningsworth brilliantly breaks down these 6 multiple roles. A textbook acts as a resource for presenting material, a source of activities, a reference for rules, an instant syllabus, a tool for self-directed learning, and honestly, a great safety net for less experienced teachers. But, and this is a huge but, here's the crucial catch. A textbook is almost always context-blind. It was written for a generic global audience. So to truly serve your specific, unique students, that book requires your active adaptation. Moving on to Section 3, Needs Analysis, the core how-to journey. So how do we actually move beyond relying solely on the publishers and start creating our own locally relevant stuff? Well, to build our own materials, we follow researcher Vilson Leffa's recursive 4-step production cycle. Think of this as the engine of material creation. It starts with analysis, really getting in there and understanding what your students actually need. Then, development, building the materials. Next is implementation, testing them out in the wild, in your classroom. And finally, evaluation. Notice how this process isn't just a straight line, it's a continuous loop. Your ongoing evaluation feeds right back into a brand new cycle of analysis, which means your custom materials just get sharper and more tailored over time. Let's zoom in on that first vital step for a second, analysis. True analysis identifies the exact gap between the total competencies required to complete a task and what the student already knows. You have to constantly ask yourself, okay, what do my students already know? Because let's face it, no one learns something entirely new without using prior knowledge as a scaffold. It's like building a bridge. If you want them to write a professional email, you don't teach them everything from absolute scratch. You figure out what vocabulary they already have in their tool belt, and you build the bridge across that specific gap. Section 4, Defining Objectives and Approaches. Setting targets and choosing the path. Okay, so once you've analyzed those specific needs and found your gap, the next critical step is setting precise objectives and selecting an instructional approach to actually cross it. This is where Bloom's framework comes in beautifully. A lot of people fall into this classic trap, setting a teacher-focused goal like, I will teach the main idea. But a true effective learning objective must describe the observable, measurable behavior of the student. It needs to sound more like, the student will identify 3 main ideas. See the difference? It gives you a highly specific, clear target to hit with your custom materials. Once that objective is locked in, you can align it with one of the major language teaching approaches. You might lean into a structural approach, focusing heavily on the nuts and bolts of grammar rules. Or maybe notional/functional, where you care more about the actual purpose and function of the language. Then there's the situational approach, which is centered on specific physical contexts, like checking in at an airport. You've also got competency-based for underlying linguistic skills, or task-based, where language learning is entirely driven by the execution of a specific activity. And finally, content-based, where language is learned incidentally while studying another subject matter entirely. The absolute best material creators, they mix and match these approaches to best serve the content. Take a real-world artifact, like an authentic Brazilian flight schedule, for instance. If you're using a task-based approach, you can ground all that abstract theory into immediate classroom reality. You adapt the artifact to teach problem-solving and reading comprehension. The student isn't just mindlessly memorizing numbers and grammar rules, they're actively figuring out, say, what time the first direct flight leaves for Brasilia. Using real-world materials like this completely bridges the gap between the safe, protected classroom and the actual real world out there. It's a total game changer. Section 5. Sequencing and motivation, structuring the experience for success. Okay, so you have these brilliantly designed, highly relevant materials, but how do you actually sequence them to ensure your students stay motivated from the minute class starts until the final bell rings?
This is where we translate academic theory into a highly actionable checklist. Robert Gogne's 9 events of instruction provide an amazing step-by-step psychological blueprint for ordering your classroom activities. You always start by gaining their attention and explicitly informing them of the objectives. Then you stimulate recall of their prior knowledge. Only after that do you present the new content and provide some learning guidance. Next, you elicit performance. Basically, get them to actively use the material and immediately provide feedback. Finally, you assess their performance and do something to enhance retention. Following this exact sequence removes the friction and ensures a scientifically sound learning experience.
But we can't forget the emotional side of learning, right? As your students are in the thick of it, writing, thinking, doing group work, applying John Keller's ARCS model is basically your secret weapon. ARCS stands for attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. Your custom materials need to immediately grab their attention. They absolutely must clearly show the relevance of the task to the students' actual everyday lives. The tasks should be scaffolded to build their confidence, so they genuinely believe they can succeed. And finally, completing the task has to provide a real sense of satisfaction. If your materials hit those 4 specific notes, your students are going to gladly put in the hard work. I want to end things today with this incredibly powerful, kind of provocative thought from researchers Souza and Freitas. They ask, are we the conductors of the textbook, or is the textbook conducting us? Think about that for a second. As educators, it is well past time to step off the podium of passive consumption. You now understand the core frameworks, from doing a proper needs analysis and setting observable objectives to applying a task-based approach and sequencing for maximum motivation. You literally have exactly what it takes to become the true conductor of your own custom, empowering educational experiences. So the only question left is, what amazing materials are you going to create for your students tomorrow?